So for this week's session, Dhruv and I kept collaborating in our sort of split workflow, starting off with him putting together some newly pre-processed features for the dataset, some text embeddings, as well as some just sort of temporal features. So he passed those over to me in the form of a new artifact, and I was able to just quickly incorporate those in my training code and make some updates to the classification models. So what I decided to do was, now that we had an updated data set and I had already trained a baseline, to take a stab at some slightly more performant models. And so I decided it was time to start doing some hyperparameter sweeps on a couple of different kind of starter model classes. So I decided to do one sweep using the XGBoost classifier and one using the light GBM classifier, which is similarly like a gradient boosted kind of model like those you get with XGBoost, but which can be a little bit lighter on compute requirements, especially like at inference time. So I tried those two things out and then did some sweeps over some of their hyperparameters. Nothing too substantial at this point, just starting to get the machinery put together to keep studying this more. But one thing I'll point out, just in the code, because we're now using the Comet Optimizer. So I'll point out, and here's the sort of training and hyperparameter sweeping script for XGBoost. But I'll point out that what I'm doing, so I'm saying, all right, let's create this Comet ML Optimizer. Maybe I'll zoom in here. And I'm going to say that, all right, cool. So my config is going to point to this command line argument, which is ultimately just pointing to a file path, and that config file looks like this. So with Comet, we write our optimizer configurations just in a standalone JSON file. You can also specify it in your script. I just think it's nice to separate things out into their own file. And this is what we pass in. So I'm passing in this case, a discrete grid of parameters I want to sweep over, a metric to optimize for, and here I'm going to be doing cross-validation, and I'm looking for the mean F1 macro average, which actually we can talk about more in the office hours session and why that was like a nice choice of metric here. And yeah, I get my parameters, and then we can also talk about an algorithm for sweeping over them. Now, because I'm doing a small discrete grid of parameters, it's nothing too exciting here, but I do want to point out, and I'll talk about this more in office hours, that Comet also provides more sophisticated algorithms for navigating those hyperparameter, sets, I suppose, such as like a Bayesian algorithm that actually updates its beliefs as it goes on and performs like a ultimately like more informed sweep of the hyperparameter set of possible feature combinations, or not feature combinations, hyperparameter combinations. So that's a little bit on the optimizer. So again, I put together just a couple of quick optimizing scripts that did some quick sweeps over two of these boosted trees based models. And why don't we take a look at the results of those. So here I'm using a panel, the optimizer report panel, which you can find in featured panels. And what this does is this will take all the experiments that are being fed into it, and it will output something like this, showing like the correlation between hyperparameters and the optimizer metric. Again, in this case, the macro averaged mean F1 score we got from cross-validation over a couple of your experiments. And the way that I've organized this page is by doing some grouping in the Comet UI. So I say here group by, and I'm grouping first on message. That's just something we're passing in to keep our runs organized manually, and the optimization ID, which is assigned by the Comet Optimizer. So my message, for instance, says train light GBM classifier. I set that manually in my script, and then all of the runs that came with a particular optimizer run, those get the same optimization ID, of course. So that way I can, as I start adding more and more sweeps, I can quickly sort of scrub through them in this table. And likewise, I can pick up the ones from the XGBoost classifier. Not for nothing, if we actually look at these results here in this table, I can sort this by, again, my macro weighted F1 score. And not for nothing, it seems, so here we're getting about 0.69 for our best one, and here about 0.66. So at least at this initial stage, XGBoost is winning, but again, let's keep in mind that I've made some pretty lightweight sweeps through hyperparameters, and there's a lot more work to be done. But we're are just continuing to amass like more and more of the right machinery to do those experiments in a principled and organized way.